es el primer evento de la industria de la moda en Latinoamérica en ser parte del movimiento global de destinos sostenibles GDS Movement y Meet for Impact, organizaciones reconocidas a nivel internacional. Esta edición 82 continuamos preparándonos para hacer la exposición sustentable de mayor alcance en el sector moda de América Latina. Nuestra visión es que todos nuestros aliados estén comprometidos con la estrategia de sustentabilidad y legado. Buenas tardes, bienvenidos de vuelta. Continuamos con nuestra tercera conferencia del día aquí en IM Talks Intermoda 82. Para esta conferencia, como les comentaba, contamos con traducción simultánea. Por si necesitan unos audífonos, pueden levantar su mano y se acercarán a ustedes a poder ofrecerles este servicio. Our next speaker is an award-winning fashion creative director, consultant, and educator with over 20 years of experience at the intersection of creativity and commerce, combining his background as a writer, theater director, and musician, and his expertise and all these things like marketing, retail, and business. He has mastered an omni-channel branding and authentic customer engagement. He has worked with renowned brands such as McLaughlin, Miguelina, Andrew Mark, and Valerie Hash, and others, and has shared his knowledge as an educator at institutions like FIT and Berkeley College. His work in academia also included integrating digital practices into coursework, hosting the iconic Faces and Places in Fashion series, and developing initiative online programs as assistant professor at Pearson School of Design. Beyond academia, he is a prolific content creator. In 2020, he launched the successful podcast Retail Revolution, which now reaches listeners in over 50 countries. He also produces Fashion Concert News Bites in collaboration with Fashion United and oversees the FS Podcast Network, creating cutting-edge educational content on design, culture, retail, and marketing. A sought-after guest lecturer and media expert, he continues to redefine how we think about fashion, education, and brand storytelling. So let's welcome Joshua Williams with his conference, The Fashion Consumer Psyche. Welcome, and thank you so much for having you here.
Thank you. Hola. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that today's session will be useful to everyone. I wanted to take a little bit of a different tact because I do have I spend a lot of time in academia, and I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs. And I thought it would be really interesting to really go back to the basics, because so often when I'm working with designers or brands, especially those that haven't fully grown or scaled, that oftentimes they haven't really taken the time to ask themselves why. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What effect is it having on consumers? And how do the consumers feel about this? So we're going to take a little bit of a path less traveled at the beginning here. And then my thought is that we will then talk about some of the current issues related to marketing and selling fashion in today's global economy. And we'll talk about how the psychology of the consumer plays a role in that. So that's our goal today. So first of all, I asked the question, why clothing? Why are we all not just sitting naked here today at this wonderful conference? Most of us probably didn't even think about that as an option, right? Because we live in a world wherein clothes are a requirement to go out in public. And what's really interesting is that clothes themselves cover up our bodies, right? And our bodies are, interestingly enough, our most authentic self, actually, right? So all of the wrinkles and the warts and all those things, that's really, truly who we are. So it's interesting when I hear people come to me and say, well, I wear fashion because it expresses who I am. Because in fact, you wear fashion in many ways to cover up who you are. Not necessarily in a negative way, but as an armor, as a mediator between yourself and those around you. So it becomes a layer of communication And often I don't think we as consumers, and certainly not as brands, do we think about it quite that way, right? We're not sitting here going, well, I think I'll just go naked today. Yes, we could do that, but we'd probably be escorted out. So the next questions are two questions I like to ask. Once we sort of establish this idea that actually fashion is a layer over our authentic selves, is what really is clothing, and then what is fashion? So let's just take like I said, we're going to go all the way to the basics for a minute here. What is clothing actually, right? So the most obvious answer is it's putting textiles, shirt, pants, dress on our bodies. But the reality is that clothing can be so much more than that, right? Upstairs on the second floor, we have accessories, jewelry, and so forth. That's also clothing. Tattoos, I love tattoos. So those are also a form, right, of clothing. It's a layer between myself and others. Hairstyle, accessories, piercings. All of these things are actually part of our wardrobe, our arsenal, if you will, of things that we will use in order to express or add that layer upon our sort of authentic, naked self, right? So one of the things I like to talk to with my clients is, well, in fact, when you're opening a fashion brand or you're thinking about yourself as a brand, what in fact are you providing the customer, right, the person that you're dressing, beyond just a pair of clothes that goes in a closet and then hopefully they wear it, right? What is it that we're actually providing them is an emotional connection of any type that's going to allow us to be expressive. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. So then what is fashion, right? And I have this interesting picture up here, which happens to be Galliano at Dior quite some time ago, but I chose it on purpose because, you know, it's sort of old school looking. It looks a little bit more like a show at an Amish farm than perhaps in Paris, right? But this is the concept of not clothing itself, not just the functional clothing, but of a creator creating something that expresses his or her own vision that we then, as consumers, decide if we want to purchase or if we want to wear, if it expresses who we are as individuals. Now, it's very unlikely that anyone rushed out to buy this whole collection, right? Because it's very particular. But on the other hand, there might be certain pieces that would speak to you that you would purchase and perhaps wear a little less, more narrowly, a little bit more according to your own style. So fashion really is just yet another layer on top of clothing itself. We have our naked body, clothing, and then the expression, which is the fashion piece, which is really exciting as a marketing person, right, or as a retail person, because what we get to do as designers and brands is we get to create clothes that aren't necessarily functional, but are actually providing some sort of emotional connection, right? So here at this conference, and there's so many wonderful brands here, and it's been great to walk around, but part of what happens, as you know, if you're working at one of these booths, is that people are buying because they have a connection to what you're selling, right? And you know very, very quickly if somebody's going to actually buy anything in your booth, very quickly, right? You try to get the people who are not out so you can get to the selling of your goods. So there's a real connection that we either have or don't have. Okay, so with that in mind, let's talk then a little bit more deeply about sort of the four categories or the four fundamentals of what I think clothing and fashion is. And again, this might feel very basic, but that's on purpose because I want you to think about clothes in these four categories as a way to empower you and how you speak about clothing or fashion to consumers. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one, which is group identity. All right, so we talked already about the fact that most of us probably wouldn't feel comfortable being naked here at this show. A, because it's not okay, right? It's illegal. But B, because no, you don't want anybody to see you naked. Why? Because it's vulnerable, right? And you're kind of left alone, if you will, you're as yourself. You have nothing to hide. You're all out there, right? Clothes, by their very nature, help us to identify with those that we align with, that we feel comfortable with, that we have community with. That can be religious, it can be political, it can be cultural, societal, it can be economic based on how much money you have or don't have. All of these things become signs, which we call, sort of philosophically, the word for that is semiotics. All of these semiotics or signs help us to communicate non-verbally who we align with, who we want to be connected with, right? So if you're getting dressed tonight to go out to the club or out to dinner, you're actually maybe not fully consciously thinking about this, but you're wondering to yourself, or you're at least putting clothes on that are going to affect the people you go with, right? We all have the FU outfit, I'll say that the nice way, which is the don't leave me alone. I'm here on my own tonight, right? We have the hey, I'm available, come say hello outfit, right? We have the I need to look respectable, right? And my parents will be very happy that I dress this way to the family event. So we know, we might not be thinking about it quite like that, but we know that there are certain things that you can and can't wear based on kind of the rules, some of them said out loud, some of them not, about what's appropriate. I'll take that even further. You see some pictures up there of a couple of different group identities. First one being a color, right? So the color of yellow is a royal color. This would denote power in Asian countries. I have Donald Trump up there. I've had him up there for a long time, and part of the reason why is because this man always wears a white shirt and a red tie, which denotes power and aggression, okay? Interestingly enough, when Obama was our president, he wore primarily blue ties, which is a sign of diplomacy, of a willingness to talk. Blue, by the way, is also a color that is the least problematic from a world view. You can wear blue, use blue, and it feels less aggressive. I have policemen up here, right? When a police wears a uniform, it actually gives them power. There's actually studies that say that a policeman who's wearing his uniform is actually physically stronger wearing that uniform than when he's not, or she. There's also a doctor. There's been studies that have been done that your doctor is actually better when they're wearing their coat, their white coat, than when they're wearing street clothes. Why? Because we've given those pieces of clothing power. They have meaning beyond the textile itself, right? So if you think about that from a fashion point of view, that's pretty important, right? So if any of you want to get into uniforms, by the way, it's a great business because they're necessary as part of our society. And I have other examples up there as well. You have the Goss, that was me in high school. We all thought we were so different, but we were just literally the same. You also have the classic American, right? Bros, waspy bros, but they're all wearing the same shorts and the same shoes and the pink shirt. It's a look, right? But that look means that you can identify with somebody. Oh, that's my crowd. That's the people I hang with. Those are the people that are like me, all right? Now, brands have used this group identity to their advantage because here's the thing. You take a brand like Dior or Louis Vuitton, it's been around for 100 of years or so, and it's kind of lost its immediate meaning, right? Louis Vuitton as a brand was a brand that was essentially made luggage for the royal family of France, right? There is no royal family of France anymore, so they have to find a new community. So what do? They use logos, visual communication, in order to essentially kind of create that same signaling that we would get normally without having to have that. So brands themselves become yet another layer on top of this that allow for group identity. This can be as simple as having a logo, like a Nike logo on your shirt, that might suggest that you're sporty or go out running all the time, or maybe Lululemon because you like yoga, or maybe a Taylor Swift shirt because you like Taylor Swift. But all of that is a logo. It's a visual representation of your tribe. All right, let's keep going. So most people, when I say, what is fashion, they say it's about individual expression. It's about who I am. Now, we've already established that who you are is underneath the clothes. So who you are really as an individual expression is how you're provoking against the group identity that we just talked about. You might be that person, or you might know that person in your group, but they're always the person who you're like, wait, you're wearing that tonight? Right? Or, oh my God, you're going out like that? Or you feel comfortable? Individual expression in fashion is typically an outlier. We typically feel uncomfortable. The word fashion, right, from an academic point of view, is literally the trend that is accepted by the majority of people at any given time, right? So fashion is what we feel comfortable with. What doesn't feel comfortable is not fashion. It's actually anti-fashion. It's the opposite of fashion. Now, what's interesting from a trend perspective is that often that very thing we feel uncomfortable with, the anti-fashion, so you take somebody like Bjork or Lady Gaga, who often is pushing against what is appropriate in our society, and often over time, while it might feel very aggressive at first, we start to accept it and say, oh, that's kind of cool, and we start to adopt it, right? So individual expression is only available to us because of group identity. It is the opposite of the group. I will say one other thing about this is that it's interesting because most of us now live in all of us now, and we live in a globalized world. I come to Guadalajara, an absolutely beautiful city, and there's a Zara, and there's Loewe, and LVMH, and every other brand that I can get in New York City. Our access is the same for the most part, right? So through globalization, we've become more alike or more monolithic, meaning we all look and feel the same. So this idea of individual expression is quite interesting, I think, and particularly in today's world of can we really be individual if we're shopping at Zara? Maybe, yeah. I mean, I know people who can take Zara pieces and turn them into something very different than what Zara intended, perhaps. Or they just exude their own style and they put it together in a certain way that looks very interesting. But again, it starts with group identity. Zara is the group identity. We like Zara because it fits our body and our expression, and then we mix it up so that it's individual. All right, the third one is function and utility. So this has become quite important in fashion, and I will tell you, at the end of the day, fashion, as you all know, is a business. We're here to make money. If we don't make money, the business goes out and there's no fashion. So it doesn't matter how beautiful the dress is. If there's nobody buying it, then there's no company, right? And that's always been, to me, the exciting part about fashion, is that it's an intersect between creativity, right, and design, and actual function and use. I can't make a shirt, even though sometimes we see them on the runway, that doesn't have armholes, right? Because you have to be able to use your arms and your legs to be able to function throughout the day. So there is a limitation, and I think oftentimes that limitation is what makes fashion so exciting, is because we're limited by the very nature of what we're creating, right? So there's only so much one can do, so it becomes then very personal. But this idea of function utility has created this whole new idea of what clothes can do. In other words, besides just being expression or group identity, they can also potentially make you better at something. Nike's the perfect example of this, right? They said, let's go out and make a shoe that makes you run better. They did that. They did it so well that ultimately we buy these shoes even if we're never going to go out running ever at all, right? Because we know that they're great running shoes and they also have style, right? And that style suggests that we're athletic and that we are interested in our health. Now, what's really interesting, and I won't go too far down this path, but oftentimes clothes themselves are the very problem. So let's take running, for example. When you're running, you sweat. And when you sweat, your clothes get wet. And when your clothes get wet, you feel gross and clammy and sick. That's how running clothes always were, until we figured out in fashion that, hey, if we can actually use the technology of wicking, which is this idea that you can take sweat off the body and trap it in the cells of the textile, then you don't feel clammy. And we can charge twice as much for that because it's a tech product, right? It has function, it has utility. So brands like Nike and Adidas, there's a reason why they're at the top right now of the fashion chain, because they're not providing just group identity and personal expression. They're also solving this very problem that, yes, they created, right? Because here's the thing. You could just go run naked if you wanted to, and the sun would dry the sweat off of your body, and it would do it naturally. But since we wear clothes, the clothes have to be developed to do that for us. And then we get to charge more for it. And as marketers, we get to tell a great story about how our clothes empower you as a runner and make you a better sports person. There's a little cynicism in that, of course, but I enjoy that, right? Like there's something to that if you're a brand person of thinking about that basic concept is that actually there's a more natural way to do this. We've chosen not to. How do I then essentially create a product that does something bigger and more? Okay. Now, there's also examples. I have a fireman in there, right? So most firemen now wear Tevlok so that it's fire resistant, right? We use that in our pans as well. So there are actual real functional value to some of these textiles that we're creating. And some of the most interesting things that I'm seeing right now out on the market are really specific to cold weather, hot weather, fire, rain, and all these types of things that are really specific. And there's a lot of opportunity, by the way, for those brands to do well. Let's take Arc'teryx, for example. You know Arc'teryx? That brand was built for essentially very wealthy outdoors people. But it was also really good. It did a very good job of keeping people warm and not bulky. It did so well that in many ways, just like Nike, it became a fashion item because it essentially went beyond its own utility into something more. So just a little point here, if you're thinking about building a brand, oftentimes your point of difference, your unique selling proposition, for all of you who've done your master's degree in business, right? Those are your phrases. Those can be very powerful points of difference or unique selling propositions that can then transcend into the fashion space. All right. Last one, protection. Now, this one is an interesting one, right? So I've got a picture of a swimsuit up there. What is it exactly protecting you from? Naked. I heard that. Yeah, that's basically it. Think about it. It doesn't keep water off of you. It doesn't keep the sand out. Actually, it keeps the sand in. It's the most uncomfortable thing to take off. And by the way, if you're a woman, you know it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time to find the perfect swimsuit. I've worked with a lot of underwear and swimwear brands, and this is the trickiest part. People will try on 50, 60 swimsuits and spend almost $150 on them for nothing. It doesn't do anything except make you so you're not naked, right? It's a lot of money. To me, this is the biggest, best part of fashion is swimwear. There's no other reason, right? So it's all about emotional connection and how you feel. And oftentimes, unfortunately, we have to drag people down like your body is to this or to that in order to sell the swimsuit so that you look a certain particular way on the beach. Other examples include coats, shorts, things like that. I do want to point out, though, that oftentimes we buy coats to stay warm in, and then we do not wear gloves or hats. Unfortunately, we lose most of the heat from our head and our hands. So great, you bought a coat, but you didn't actually wear the hat because you didn't want to mess up your hair, and you didn't want to wear the gloves because it's too hard to text on your phone. So it's interesting that people will buy things for protection, but actually it's debatable whether it's actually protecting them. It's the idea of protection. So for those of you in the outerwear business, for example, often it's more about the trend than it is actually about whether or not it's going to keep you warm. Warm is I hope it keeps me warm concept, right? All right. Also, interestingly enough, when it gets really hot, most of us put on short shorts and a tank top, right? If you were a scientist or a doctor, would you be proposing that that's the best thing to wear in the heat, in the sun? Not at all. So in the Middle East, where it's very hot and dry, they wear very loose clothing, white clothing. That allows for you to be air conditioned, so to speak, and it keeps the sun off of your skin, which causes the sunburn and the heat on your skin and the exhaustion. So actually, we should be wearing more clothes when it's hot outside. So my point is, we definitely buy for protection, but it's a lot more complex than that. Perhaps we're buying with the idea that we're trying to be rather than actually being. Okay, so what does this all mean? All right, you're like, okay, so he got up here and talked about nudity. That's weird. We're at a fashion show. So what I'm really hoping for you to grasp here is that if we take a little time as designers, as marketing, as business people, and we start to really ask some of these questions and understand what our product is supposed to do or not do, that we can then find stronger relationships, stronger networks, and connections with our consumer. Because then we're being honest about what it is we're creating, and the people who are buying from us are buying because they then trust us. I had a question last night at a panel discussion about this, and I always say, and Keenan had mentioned it earlier in his presentation, if you have really good people who really like what you do, they will share that with other people. That's the best kind of marketing you can get. We know that, right? And that's why social media can be so positive. But if we do something wrong, or we do something that is not forthright, it can become our biggest misery, right? Because people will go tell everyone how wrong you've been. So, with that in mind, I wanted to look at 3 very specific current issues in today's sort of market and kind of pull some of these concepts together in hopes of helping you make some considerations about how you might go about building your business or growing your business or thinking about your business in today's fashion world. Okay, so the first one is filter world. Has anyone heard of filter world? So I've heard rumblings about this for a while, and then this wonderful book came out called Filter World. You can find it on Amazon. And I read it during the summer, and it kind of freaked me out a little bit because I think it finally put to words what I've been feeling. How many of you feel like on Instagram at this point, you're not seeing your friends too often, and you're just seeing content that you sort of like, oh, that's cool, but did I ask for that? I don't think so, right? And how many of you noticed on Instagram that it's no longer in order of the date that it was posted? So you might get something posted, or you might see something that was posted a month ago as if it was just posted on Instagram. Or how many of you noticed that if you like something, all of a sudden, let's say you like a favorite artist, all of a sudden every other musician that's exactly like that musician is now popping up on your feed, right? This is part of Filter World. So Filter World essentially is this idea that because of social media and an algorithm that these social media companies use and search companies, so this would be Google, Amazon, Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, they're using algorithms in order to capture our data and to understand how to sell back to us. All right? Now, in theory, that's very good for a company because if we have good data and we know who we're trying to speak to, we can do that better. So here's the reality. We do that better. But the way that we do that is we try to get rid of all the other noise so that we're front and center. And what that means is that over time, whether we like it or not, we become part of a bubble that we call a filtered bubble. And that bubble informs everything that we like or don't like. How many of you have been looking at Instagram and thought, oh God, I want to go to Iceland on vacation? Like, who thought of that 10 years ago? No one. But now that there's all the photos of, the Aurora Borealis at a particular spot. And here's the best part. We become repetitious. So if you go to Iceland and you've seen enough pictures, you know exactly where you're supposed to go, take a picture so that you can be part of that same filter bubble. Other things have happened. You see pictures up here. There's a couple of examples, but coffee shops around the world all look the same now. We call it the hipster coffee shop. It has white subway tiles, like in New York City. Typically has Edison light bulbs. They always have cortados, which in America was not a thing. Even Starbucks now has a cortado, which isn't a cortado. It's a cappuccino. But anyway. But all of that look is part of the filter world. Why? Because if I'm a hipster from Williamsburg in New York and I have money to go travel and I go to Madrid, where am I going to feel comfortable? In a coffee shop that looks like I'm in Williamsburg. Which is kind of sad if you think about it, because you're in Madrid, right? But this is what starts to happen. When I landed at Guadalajara and got out of the airport, it was exactly the same stores as the airport in Newark, New Jersey. There was a Starbucks, there was a Carl's Jr., there was everything exactly the same. That's a filter bubble. Another example of this would be music, right? So for example, the typical song 10 years ago was about 4 minutes long. Today it's 2 minutes and 40 seconds. TikTok did that, right? So TikTok, because it's a short format, informs how artists, creative people, have to create content so that the consumer is willing to consume it. Nobody's going to listen to a 6-minute song on TikTok. We're bored already, right? And if you're in America, you're just not on TikTok anymore. Here's another example, Prada. Prada opens a bakery shop. Prada did not open a bakery shop because it wants to get into the muffin business. Believe me, they're doing fine with bags. Why did Prada open a coffee shop, a bakery? Well, look at the picture. It's the one on the bottom that's lime green. What would you do if you were in that shop? First thing, take a picture. You're just doing marketing for them, right? And then everybody has to go to that Prada shop because it doesn't matter if the muffins are even good. It's because that's a shot that you're supposed to get for your Instagram. So it can be very powerful in a positive way. It can be very powerful in a negative way. And if you want to read the book, I would highly recommend it. It is called Filter World, but it takes these ideas and it talks about fashion in particular. So have you heard the word like cottagecore? That's a filter, that's literally a filter bubble. Hashtag cottagecore. That's exactly what it is. Even my mom knows what cottagecore is now. She's in her 70s. And she's like, is that cottagecore? And I'm like, how do you know about cottagecore? But she's on Instagram and TikTok too, so she knows. All right, so that would be number one. And how do we as individuals, how do we as brands sort of get past this? Well, it's difficult. And I'll tell you, it costs money. Or you have to figure out a way to essentially buck the system. So there was a question earlier about consolidation of businesses, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. The reality is that you have to figure out how to provoke the conversation or you're not part of the conversation. You can't put hashtag cottagecore and expect your business to go up because there's millions of people doing that. You're competing against a million people. One of the things that I say to young entrepreneurs who are interested in being in fashion is skip out on Instagram for now. Or at least don't make it the main part of your business. Go open an actual store. Why? Because you're going to be forced to actually talk to people who are your customers, who are going to tell you good things and bad things about your clothes. They're going to tell you what they like and don't like, if it fits or if it doesn't fit, if it fell apart or it stayed intact. They're going to tell you all of this. Hopefully they're going to drop by and say hello over time, and you're going to get to know them, and then they're going to become your confidant. They're going to become your greatest supporter, right? And when you market to that people, you can market to them in your neighborhood because your store is in your neighborhood where you live, right? You don't put a store in New York and live in Guadalajara. So you are actually connected to the community in which you're selling. If you can prove that, then it makes it so much easier to go online. I think part of the problem with a lot of brands is they think they can skip the hard part because of social media. They can't. You still have to build a community. It's a customer. Instagram, TikTok, they amplify what you do. They are not who you are. So another thing I didn't mention earlier is it's gotten to the point that if you're a photographer or a singer or a fashion designer, oftentimes the first question a booker or a manager or somebody's going to ask is, guess what? How big is your Instagram feed? Not, are you an actually good singer or do you actually design beautiful collections? It's how big is your followers? Right? And that's a wrong-headed approach in my opinion, because what we're doing is we're sort of trying to bypass the actual design process. All right, I could speak about this for literally like 8 months, so I will continue forward here. The other big issue is consolidation. And this came up in the earlier conversation, and I was glad to hear it because in my mind, this is probably the single biggest issue in fashion today. And essentially, very quickly, it's this idea that some companies now own most fashion brands. When they do that, it allows them what's called business leverage, which allows their prices internally to go down so that they make better profit margins. So it's great for business. If I'm working on the business side with clients, I say, who can you buy? How can you get into other markets through purchasing other brands, right? But for the consumer, what it means is there's less options. Because I'm going to say it out loud, basically everything at LVMH is made at the same factory at this point. Dior is not a whole lot different than Givenchy. It's all the same factories. Why? Because that's why they bought them in the first place, so that they could consolidate textile, consolidate manufacturing, consolidate shipping, manufacturing, and distribution. So if you buy a Dior, a bag, it's the same as a Louis Vuitton bag, really. It's just a different logo on it. And a different design aesthetic as well, for sure. But it's what this means, and what I wanted to talk about today was it becomes very difficult then for young brands to compete against these brands because they essentially own the marketplace. They own the department stores. LVMH right now is in the process of buying Bergdorf Goodman and Neiman Marcus. So that will change luxury in America because one company will own it all, right? So I will just echo what was already said earlier today, which is you cannot beat this. There's no way. You don't have the money. There's no way you're going to beat Bernard Arnault at his own game. He's brilliant. So you have to do something different, not a whole unlike Filter World. How do you build that community in person, right? How do you provoke, make change in your own neighborhood? Because ultimately, if you can do that and prove it, the ability to grow and that eventually provoke LVMH is much higher than if you try to go out and just beat a game that's sort of against you in the first place. But I think it's important to kind of call this out and just say that this is, we celebrate when Versace and Prada are connecting, but maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should be thinking about how do we keep some of these brands more personal and disconnected so that we can continue to have a really interesting fashion marketplace rather than a marketplace owned by a few. And last is experience. So I'll go quickly here because I know my time is short. But I think, I hear this word all the time, how do I create experience? And first thing I'm going to say is in person. I'm definitely like a lot of you, I'm sure, where it's so much easier to stay home and just surf the web and find everything I need and then go to DoorDash and have it delivered to my house or Amazon. It becomes pretty easy, right? But it's not terribly interesting. I don't meet anyone along the way. I don't have any conversations. It's just me, myself, and DoorDash, right? So one of the key things is just as basic as it can be. Having interactions, personal interactions with people is still really important. And retail, in my opinion, starts at that physical level. I will tell you that in my experience right now in New York and the United States, there's no such thing as an only e-commerce business. That's over. Even Amazon can't do that anymore. They have realized that if they are only online, they will lose you eventually to somebody else who does it faster and better. Right? Even LVMH knows this. Why are they buying department stores? Because they know at the end of the day, if they don't control the actual experience, they're going to lose you as a customer because there's no meaning left in their brand. When you go shop at Dior, right, whether you're rich or poor, it's meaningful. You don't walk in and go, oh yeah, I'll take that bag, okay, thanks, bye. Unless you're Kim Kardashian, right? You really go in there and you expect to have some champagne and probably talk and find out about the bag and think about it and take pictures of it and like, oh my God, I'm buying my Dior bag, right? There's a whole process. If you just did that online and that was your initial interaction with Dior, you're never going to interact with Dior again. You're going to go to another brand. So those personal experiences or shifting experiences are really key. And I'll add one other piece. The other trend that I am seeing in the industry is a shift away from people shopping for brands anyway. They want the brands to be where they are. So if you like going to music festivals, for example, they should be there, not at the mall. Nobody's going to the mall, driving to the mall, going shopping. That's boring. Going to a music festival, having all your favorite brands there, that's cool. Going on a trip, having all your favorite brands in the airport, so it's just easy and you buy stuff, that's cool. Going to a really beautiful hotel where there's a beautiful boutique and you buy your favorite dress because you're on vacation and why not? You'll spend the money. That's cool. Going to a mall, not cool, right? And I will tell you that Gen Z is not interested in going shopping. We've trained them too well that they can have everything they want from online. So we really have to meet people where they are, and that I think is really key. So takeaways real quick are, and then I'll open up for discussion, is I really hope that as you're looking at your businesses, you don't move past the fundamentals. You really look at, how am I part of this group expression? Or am I really part of being sort of an FU to the world and like really doing something different and making something provocative, if that's your thing? Am I into utility and function? Am I actually creating a product that enhances people's lives, right? Or am I in the business of faux protection, swimsuits, right? And what does that really mean? So I hope you think about those things and really sort of incorporate them into how you build your businesses, because at the end of the day, that's what informs your mission statement, your vision statement, your operational plan, where you open stores, and how you market and engage people. Thank you very much for having me, and I'd love to take any questions you have.
We
Hello.
meet again.
Christian, right?
Yeah. I have a question now that you talk about the physical experience.
Yes.
For example, I'm a designer of haute couture, if you can put it that way, especially in jewelry.
Okay.
How can you control that if you're beginning to like get a retail place for a high-end jewelry brand?
To be honest, luck. Yeah. At the very beginning, there's really only two ways that's going to happen. You're really lucky, and you meet somebody at a place like this, and they take a love of what you do, and they're like, oh my God, let's give you a try. Luck. Also, you came here, so there's some work involved, so it's not just luck. But the second piece is you have to put your time into it. I mean, here's the thing. Every brand at LVMH has been around for more than 100 years. It is easier to restart an old brand than it is to start a new brand. That's why we keep seeing new brands over and over. Even Rihanna tried to start a brand. Bernard Arnault funded it at LVMH. It closed because it's too hard, it's too expensive. Now, if Rihanna had started her own brand and kind of built it up over 20, 30 years, and then LVMH bought it, that would be a different story. But I do think often as entrepreneurs, we want to go from 0 to 30 in 1 year and to 100 in 4 years. And you do have to think big, but you also have to be it takes time, and you have to come to events like this and sell and talk to people and create trust and create interest. And like I said earlier, you have to create that emotional connection. Yeah. Hi.
Hello, congratulations. In your opinion, what is the role of the public relations? How important it is for the retail world?
For written? I mean, I hate to say this because I'm a writer, but it's become not important. Yeah. Social media has hijacked the conversation. And to be frank, there's nobody, including myself, who loves to read and get into the weeds who's reading full articles unless they're really intently interested. I'm the guy who's reading a 500-page book on electronic music in 1978 because that's what I like, right? But most people don't care. What they care about is what their friends and their community's saying. And it's sad because I actually think the journalist, the critic, has a role and an important role, and I think we've lost that. I think that's why there's a lot of shit on the market, to be honest, okay? Because there isn't somebody who's calling it out. If you go back to the heyday of fashion in 80s and 90s, man, some of those critics were harsh. They called it like it was, and people listened. They don't anymore. It's not part of the thing. Really, when you go to the store and you buy something, you're more likely to send a picture to your friend and say, what do you think? Do I look fat in this or do I look cute? And if she says you look cute, you buy it. So there's no critic involved, right? There's no journalism. So I guess what I'm saying is it's more important than ever, I think. But I don't know that anyone cares anymore. I think we've just kind of moved past that. Other question? Hi.
Hello. So I have a small clothing brand, and I sell on music festivals and also online. And now I would like to give the step into wholesale. How can I make this relationship? How can I get this connection to the customer through another person, or like how can I take
you
this
call
jump?
somebody like me. No, her question is how she has a brand and she wants to essentially make it bigger by going into wholesale, which is going into partnerships with retailers or other events. Good question. So I will say right off the bat, it's harder than ever because so few people own these companies. So, for example, in America, the typical thing you'd want to do is get into a Macy's if you were at mid-market, or into Neiman Marcus, or Saks Fifth Avenue, or Barney's. Barney's doesn't even exist anymore. So it's harder than ever because they're all consolidated. And so a lot of it is networking and finding the right people and getting the opportunity to share your work. That said, though, I will say I'm a big believer in wholesale if you can do it because it mitigates the risk in your portfolio, right? If you're only selling direct to consumer, it's all on you. If you give some of that to someone else, it mitigates the risk for yourself. So if you can do it, it's good. But in the meanwhile, you just got to be at all the places until finally the store comes to you, as usually, and says, we love what you're doing. We want to buy into it. So that could be festivals, showrooms, trade shows. A lot of it is just that time to do it. And ultimately, you'll have really great like Neighborhood Goods or the Webster, which Keenan mentioned earlier. Those are great stores, and they often are willing to take a risk on younger designers if it fits their mix. So if you're really interested in being in a particular store, you have to go and know that store in and out. I was selling a product to Dillard's, which is a big department store in the United States. I don't like Dillard's. It's not my store. I don't buy things there. But I spend so much time at Dillard's. I walked every single aisleway. I took notes on exactly how they sold product, what the brands were next to each other. And then I went to my client and I said, all right, here's what they're looking for. Here's where you need to be. Here's the conversation we need to have, right? So I needed to know Dillard's better than Dillard's knew Dillard's. That's the way. One of the ways. Yeah. Other question?
We have time.
We have time? Okay. Let's move it.
Hey, so I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm a designer.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have like a little project that is like about upcycling.
Okay.
So I have realized that my target is very niche, like very small, and so you can have like a higher price and I don't know, like sell to those people.
Yes.
But what I'm thinking is like the next generations, because like I think like fashion has come to a place like of homogenization of fashion. Like so everybody looks the same. Like you said, there's there's Zara, there's Shein, and there's all other brands. But what I'm wondering is, where do you think new generations are focusing like their shopping to more like customized, personalized, that reflects their personality, or to a more homogenic fashion and like more simple and minimalistic
Yeah.
in a way?
It's a great question because it's not an easy one to answer. Here's why. On the surface, they all want something different, but because of Filter World, the reality is that Gen Z is the most monolithic, boring, and I don't mean this in like you're boring, but like they all see the same thing and they want to be liked by people, and the way you be liked by people is by wearing the right thing. So we know how it is. We all went to high school, so we play into that. That said, I do think that the younger generations are looking for ways to push against, as they usually do, push against their elders. I think one of the ways they're doing that is trying to find individuality, and I think vintage in particular, upcycling, recycling are ways that they're doing it. What I will say is it's not terribly sustainable because they are buying too much of it and oftentimes not wearing any of it, and it becomes a whole other issue. But if I had a preference, I would rather people go shopping at secondhand and vintage for two reasons. One, it is technically more sustainable. And number two is it's far more individualistic. I mean, at least what you're buying there, you can tell your friend, guess what, you can't buy it. There was only one. I bought it. It's mine, right? And I think there's some power in that. That's the way it was in the 80s and 90s when I grew up. I was an 80s kid, but you know, it was all about finding things that no one else had. Or you went to the mall and bought what everyone had. But there was kind of two dialectics there, if that makes sense. So, yeah. One more? Okay.
La última, Leo.
Hi.
Buenas tardes. Mira, yo tengo una tienda de ropa para dama en Monterrey, sí, tienda, y estoy incursionando, ya está en redes sociales, tienda en línea, pero en tu experiencia, ¿recomiendas más enfocarme a línea o sucursales?
Okay, I got a little bit of that, but if you can make sure that otherwise I'll go on a tangent.
He already has a fashion brand, and he has an Instagram, and he has his social media, but he's asking if you recommend him to go all online or a physical store.
Well, okay, so at the end of the day, a mature company has to be everywhere. And what I mean by mature is that if you are a company that has choices and has a budget, an operational budget, ultimately your goal is going to have a what I call sort of a multi-approach portfolio. So what that means is you're going to do a little bit of wholesale, direct-to-consumer online, have your own store, have perhaps a festival circuit or whatever, if that makes sense for your brand. But the idea is that we're way past the concept of I'm an online brand or I'm an Instagram brand, because that will only get you so far. And oftentimes, especially if you're talking about online, because of Filter World, you might make it for a while, but then guess what? You're going to be spit out just as fast because someone else is behind you. When you get spit out, meaning you're no longer like the cool cottagecore kid anymore, you need to have a real business behind that, which would involve stores, wholesale partners, and so forth. So any entrepreneur that I talk to or any business owner that's trying to scale their business, it's not about how do we just go online and try to make all the money. It's how do we look at your whole entire business and find ways to find what I call incremental business growth, because ultimately that's how you build the foundation. And then at some point you might find that online is your best and that's where you put more of your time and money. I will tell you though that if you do that, oftentimes it will have to rebalance again, and then you'll have to go open a new store and to kind of create that balance. So we live in a complex world. There's no such thing as I'm a, one. It's all about omni-channel essentially. I can't believe I'm saying this, but people are actually buying on Instagram now, and 10 years ago that was not the case. People would not shop on social media because that was their personal time, but now it's just all our time. So things are also changing, and you have to be kind of on top of it. To be a good business owner today, you can't just say, well, Instagram is the way to do it. You have to actually be looking for the next Instagram, right? A lot of these brands that have done very, very well on Facebook, Instagram, and so forth, didn't do it because they had some analysis from a McKinsey group. They did it because they were like, I don't know, I heard about this Instagram thing, it's new, no one's using it, but I'll try it. And it was a new place, There were people listening. They were able to connect. Now there's billions of people. There's no way to really connect. It's really more to it's really, Instagram today is less about building something new and more about creating conversation about what you're already doing across multiple channels. Does that make sense? Okay. And I do have this on there in case anyone wants to get in contact. I'm happy. I do coaching sessions, mentoring, work with a lot of businesses. So I'm always happy to have a conversation with you about what you're doing or what you need. And it's been such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. From Intermoda, we have an acknowledgement for you. Thank you for
thank
being
you.
here with us
That was-
and sharing all this information and all your spark with us. Tendremos una conferencia más a las 6 de la
Oh, that's very
tarde en
nice.
este espacio. Por si a alguno de ustedes les interesaría, está todavía muy interesante lo que va a seguir para que se den una vuelta y